Hey, Peg. Did you know we're out of towels in the bathroom?
Married with Children, man, that was a show that was really something else. Now, unfortunately, I did not watch the show when it was on the air for the first time because obviously I was too young to watch it. And it started for me when I started watching the reruns on TV. It was mostly when FX was still airing them. And then one year they actually aired the Christmas special on Fox for a holiday special. And I think it was the same year the Married with Children reunion actually happened. And that's one of the reasons why I really started getting into the show in particular, because I really didn't know how funny this show really was until I finally got around to watching it. And I gotta say, man, Married with Children is an experience. I mean, this is a show that has surprisingly held up very well over time. And, when you think about what the show used to be about, it was a show literally called at one point, We're Not the Cosbys. And, look at what's happened to Bill Cosby since then. And, in fact, most TV dads back in the day, they were supposed to be more family-friendlier compared to Al Bundy in this. But you know what? Al Bundy has pretty much evolved into the dad that we all kind of wish we had nowadays. And we don't look at guys like Bill Cosby or Tim Allen the same way we did back then. Like Ed O'Neill Al Bundy really has held up as the guy that we wish that he could be our dads, because he just seemed like such a badass dude. Like, it's amazing how the times have changed. And Married with Children really was such an experience, man. If you don't know the show, if you're one of the few people that have been living under a rock since 1987, it was actually one of the first shows that aired on Fox when it premiered on April 5th, 1987. And it ran for 11 seasons, which is incredible to think about, because it's up there with shows like MASH and Cheers and Frasier and like Two and a Half Men, Big Bang Theory, these shows that have been on for so long that have become comedy classics, Modern Family. I think The Jeffersons was another one that ran for 11 seasons, if I'm not mistaken, but it was on TV for a very long time, and like, it really was one of those shows where it didn't really start off as a success at first, but then as time went on, it really became something that was just an experience to watch on so many different levels. I don't think I've ever seen a TV show where you have so many people, a studio audience, the way that this show has a studio audience. I mean, this was a show that really was so completely different from most comedies on TV at the time.
Thank you.
I mean, on what other sitcom in the 80s and 90s are you going to hear people hooting and hollering and like, what laugh track canned audience back then was like that? And usually you could tell which shows had specific canned audiences. Like if you listen to the Seinfeld laugh track, it's always the same laugh track they always use. It's all not really the same people there, even though they did film in front of a live studio audience. How I Met Your Mother has that too. But on Married with Children, you can always tell that the people were just hooting and hollering in the building. Like they were literally there feeling those moments, and that was just such an experience back then that's just amazing to think about here. But if you've never seen this show, this is Married with Children. It takes place in Chicago and follows the lives of Al Bundy, played by Ed O'Neill, a former high school football player who was known for scoring 4 touchdowns in one game back in the 1966 state championship, which is funny because Ed O'Neill actually was a football player for 1 year. He actually was a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was signed as an undrafted free agent in 1969 in the first year for Chuck Noll, and then he was cut in training camp because he had to compete with Mean Joe Green, Elsie Greenwood. And of course, that's kind of the inspiration for how that took place. He's a former high school football player turned hard-luck woman's shoe salesman, and his lazy wife Peggy's played by Katie Seagal, their pretty but dim-witted daughter Kelly, played by Christina Applegate, and their smart aleck son Bud, played by David Faustino. The show also features their neighbors Steve and Marcy Rhodes, played by Ted McGinn. No, Steve was David Garrison, and Marcy was Amanda Burse, both of whom Al found annoying. And then later on, Marcy marries Jefferson. Now he's played by Ted McGinley, who's a white-collar criminal who becomes her trophy husband and Al's sidekick, which is funny enough because around that time, Ted McGinley was seen as the Death Note for a TV show. Like, he shows up in the last few years of Happy Days. He's in the last few seasons of The Love Boat. He was in the last seasons of Hotel. He was in the last seasons of Dynasty. And, there was that point where if he shows up on your TV show as a recurring character back in the day, your show was pretty much going to get canceled soon after. But Jefferson comes into the show fairly early on. Like, not really early on. He does have one cameo in the Christmas special that I was talking about before, where he plays like the alternate universe husband to the Bundys in there. It's a parody of It's a Wonderful Life, and Sam Kinnison's the angel showing Al Bundy what his life would be like if he never existed, and the family's actually named Jablonski. But then when David Garrison left, I think it was 91, if I'm not mistaken, 91, and then he comes in, and it's just like, in 91, you think the show's over, but the show went on for 6 more years while he was there, so that kind of, like, was the end of that, the curse was lifted for him. But, like, this is a show that was just so incredible, and the ways that the funny thing about Ted McGinley's coming into the show, like, that would be the Death Note right there. Another thing that was really the Death Note about this show was that everything about this show that should be the Death Note of it kind of goes the complete opposite way, because think back to what happened back in the 1980s, like late 1989. You have the story of how Married with Children actually became must-see TV for Fox back then, because there was if you didn't know, there was a story about this woman named Terry Ricolta from Michigan who led a boycott of the show after viewing one of the episodes where she was offended by the image of an old man wearing a woman's garter and stockings, and the scene where Steve touches the pasties of a mannequin dressed in S&M gear, a homosexual man wearing a tiara on his head, and Al's line, and they wonder why they call them queens, and like a half-nude woman who takes off her bra in front of Al. And actually, Ricolta began a letter-writing campaign through advertisers demanding they boycott the show, and it was successful at first. Like, advertisers began dropping their support for the show, and Ricolta made several different appearances on TV shows demanding the show's cancellation, and Fox actually refused to air the top episode that was called I'll See You in Court, which had become known as the lost episode until FX started airing it in 2002. That was actually my first episode of the show I ever watched, because it was on FX at the time, and they were advertising it as the lost episode, and it's just like, I'll check it out. There's nothing else on TV, and then that was kind of my introduction to Married with Children, honestly. And the funny thing about it, viewers got curious over the boycott and over the show itself, that it actually led to a dramatic ratings boost because of what Ricolta did. And she's been referenced twice on the show. Basically, the show's basically thanking her for the success that the show would have ended up having, because the show would later go on for I think 8 more seasons after that particular episode really is aired. And it just goes to show you that it just really goes to show you what something like that could do to a TV show. Because usually, that's usually the Death Note right there. But Married with Children basically said, no, it's not. I mean, it's funny because The Simpsons actually did a parody on the second season of their show, which is, I feel like, kind of the same thing that happened there, where Marge tried to get Itchy and Scratchy off the air because Maggie saw an episode and she tried to basically kill Homer. She hit Homer with a mallet, and then, like, throughout the episode, it's assumed that she's trying to kill Homer in some way, shape, or form. And she succeeds at first in getting the show canceled, but then basically what happens is that when Marge needs to run another protest with when Michelangelo's David comes to town, she doesn't think that there's any reason why people shouldn't see it. Like, everyone basically says, like, well, how can you be for this and you're against this? And essentially ends the argument there that Marge was trying to put with Itchy and Scratchy, and the show's back on the air. So I wouldn't be surprised if they got inspiration from this particular episode of Married with Children and how that show became successful after that. And, like, the show really had a lot of these things where it would have killed them right from the get-go if they had in normal circumstances. Like, there was episodes where Peg got pregnant one season. There was a point in the first half of which season was that? I think it was 91, if I'm not mistaken. Season 6, I think it was. was either season 6 or season 7 where Peg got pregnant, and essentially they thought, okay, here comes where the show starts to begin, its inevitable downfall. And then nope, the show continued to be successful once they got rid of that storyline. The next season they had a storyline where they brought in a little kid. And he was in the first couple of episodes of the season, and you thought, okay, here we go, here's the Death Note, here's another one of those Death Notes. But they got rid of it, and the show continued to remain popular. The show was popular for a good period of time. It was on Sunday nights for Fox for a number of years, and then in the last season, they moved it to Saturday nights. They moved it to a night that was kind of... They still had shows on Saturday nights back then. It wasn't just always Cops and America's Most Wanted. They tried putting Married with Children on in '96, and it didn't work out, so they essentially moved it to Sunday, back to Sunday for a little bit before they moved it again to Monday. And then the show didn't really have a proper finale, too. Fox basically just decided to cancel it. They announced it publicly before letting the cast and crew know. I thought that the belief was that they were going to do one more season to wrap it up, and then the show never came back after that. And the cast was really peeved about that. I'm actually kind of surprised Katie Sagal actually continued to work with Fox on Futurama, which would come out a couple years later when you think about it. She was upset, Ed O'Neill was upset, and O'Neill basically thought that the TV stations who owned the syndication rights to the show had to put pressure on Fox and Sony to end the series because they had nearly 3 times the episodes needed for syndication, and the production of the episodes would have resulted in higher rights fees. This was around the same time that Fox also said, yeah, the critic is a success, but we want to own the show, and we just don't want to have we don't own the show, so we're just going to go ahead and cancel it, and even though it's a success. But Fox made a lot of bad decisions back then. I mean, this is something that Fox has been doing for years, and they were the edgy network, but even they had their times around that period where they made decisions that made you go like, what the hell were you thinking? And honestly, Married with Children probably could have still continued if they just kept it where it was on Sunday nights. I mean, it was still a very popular show even after it was gone, and it's a show that still has a lasting legacy. Like I said, it has evolved to a point where people have realized that this show has actually held up much better than I think we've ever let on, because it's a show that's still held up well over time. There's actually been talks of an animated revival, and they're basically doing it because of, unfortunately, Christina Applegate has been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which as of now, the show is still very much in development, as she, O'Neill, Sagal, and Faustino are just waiting to hear what happens with the show going forward. And I don't know if it's actually going to happen or not. It'd be interesting to see what an animated version of this would be like, but then again, we just had Good Times, the animated reboot of that, and look at how well that turned out. And there was actually talks at one point of doing a spin-off with Bud Bundy. They actually had several spin-offs with Married with Children. There was one that they were going to do with Steve Rhodes, but that unfortunately never went anywhere. There was another one where they had Matt LeBlanc on, pre-Friends, Top of the Heap, which actually led to yet another spin-off, Vinny and Bobby, which also had LeBlanc in it. And there was a show where you had Enemies, which was a spin-off that was supposed to be a spoof on Friends. There was a series about the No Ma'am Group without Al Bundy that was basically rejected by Fox over fears of misogyny, and especially around the time because Ally McBeal would premiere the next year. I mean, the show has a lasting legacy to it, and I don't think anybody really expected that back then because, like I said, Married with Children was seen as the anti-family comedy at the time, but we'll look at where most of those family comedy superstars were back then, like Tim Allen, Roseanne, Bill Cosby. Look at where they are now, and look at where Married with Children is right now in terms of how high of a pedestal we put that show on. And really, if you ever I would have liked to seen what that show was like when it was first airing. Like I said, I didn't watch the show until well after the series had ended, and people still liked it then, but it would have been amazing to see how much Married with Children left that much of a lasting impact. I would have loved to see what The Simpsons was like at peak Simpsons popularity back in the 1990s, but it's just one of those things that's just like, what if? But you know what? It still holds up. It's a show that has surprisingly held up much better than I think people have let on. It's a show that's still funny as hell. Just a great show. I can't recommend it enough. Married with Children. What a wonderful show. So that's it for this conversation. If you really want to dare yourself to watch my last video where I basically proclaim that the internet is wrong for saying that Star Wars has been worse under Disney, I make the argument that it got better under Disney. Well, I found out that This is probably my most disliked video I've ever done. I look at the likes and dislikes on my channel dashboard, and it's literally 9 thumbs down over 0 thumbs up. So I knew it was going to be controversial, but if you dare to watch it, please go ahead and check out the link there, and also check out some of the other videos I've done. And I'll see you guys next week. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.